Bloodtorva just released 2 days ago, and I'm here to teach you what you need to know to beat the 4 bosses and claim a set for yourself. This is a 4-part series with example kills linked in the description. If you want a reference for some of the concepts I'll be talking about, they're employed during all of those kills. So if you need tips on those other bosses too, I'd strongly recommend that you check out the other summaries as well. First off, I'm going to assume you already know the basics of the regular bosses. This isn't a guide for your first ever experience with the Desert Treasure 2, and it's not going to walk you through every single second of the fight. Therefore, I'm running through all the basics very quickly so we can get to focus on the important parts. This guide is here to teach you what is most important to focus on in each fight, how to deal with certain big mechanics, and give you some tips that should drastically reduce your number of wipes. I want to trim the fat, so here's a table of contents and let's get to it. Leviathan setups can differ a little bit, but the necessities are simple. I'll cover an experimental setup a little bit later towards the end of the guide. But for now, Webweaver, Stam, Range Pots, Restores, these are all required. When you start out, you might bring more brews with you while you get used to the early part of the fight, but as you get better at it, you're probably not going to need that many. It's really up to you if you want to ditch them for combo food or extra switches, but generally speaking, the brews don't really matter once you can get past the first part. Couple P-necks is usually pretty good for the Enrage phase. Equip them after dumping both of your Webweaver specs. You don't need too many in this setup because most of the time, it'll just kill you before they activate anyway. Sets of Anglers and Karamblons are good for combo food, but I'm not gonna lie, I personally don't think you'll ever need more than 4 pairs of them. ZCB is nice for making the early fight a little bit quicker. Dump it at the start of the fight or right after a special to avoid the damage reduction. If you're using the new range ring, then you can only dump 1 spec at the start of the fight. Then you have to save specs so you have double Webweaver for Enrage phase. If you don't have the new ring, then you can actually use a Lightbearer and get 2 ZCB specs before you need to start saving. Optionally, you can also take full Void range for a switch. This is better for the stun shots and for Enrage, since Enrage gives you 100% accuracy and it scales a minimum hit off of your current max hit. If you miss a flick, you're going to take damage whether you're in Void or Missouri, so you might as well get the extra max hits from Void. Who knows, it might be the difference between killing the Enrage phase 1 hit quicker. So those are the main setups, but if you try all the tactics in this guide and still don't think you're getting anywhere, I have one last setup at the end of the guide that you can potentially try out, just reaching for anything that works. But for now, let's move on to the main fight. Setting up the basics. You're going to want some tile markers. Mine are a bit overdone and hectic because I did whatever I needed to not get meleeed, but Kirby's base tiles will be linked in the description, and if that's all you're using, I would strongly recommend unmarking all of the white tiles closest to Leviathan. Up till recently, I'd have for sure told you to unmark the melee distance tiles, but using the radius marker plugin, you can now show exactly where you get meleeed from Leviathan. And you can also show the protection radius of the orb. So I'd strongly recommend using this plugin now. You can see the settings for it on screen. Credit to LDex on Twitch or MarvinDex on Twitter for showing his settings. This should help you to not get meleeed, which is absolutely huge because getting meleeed in 80 is like 40% of all deaths during Enrage phase. Trust me, this will save you a lot of orbs. You're also going to want to turn on the boss HP bar in the RuneScape options settings, because you need to know the exact HP of the boss to see when the Enrage phase starts. In addition, I'll also explain how to use the tiles that Kirby has just to deal with Leviathan's specials. He uses a special after every stun shot from a shadow barrage, so they'll alternate, but for the first one you can also see which one is happening in advance if you just read your chat box. If you're getting boulders, he'll shoot 10 boulders, and you can stack 2 of them on each tile if you want. It's not really necessary, but it can help conserve space before you have the tornado come out. Usually, just put them in the tiles marked inside the corners with at least a 1 gap to run behind them and 1 exit so you don't get trapped inside. Don't drop them in the middle of the room though, because boulders in the middle will make your Enrage phase a lot harder. And getting trapped sounds stupid, but it happens more than you think. Try to avoid getting too close to the corners because sometimes it's not that easy to see where you can and can't run through. Anyways, after 10 boulders, stay behind the shelter until he explodes and you're good. But for the northwest corner, try not to put more than 1 set of boulders there, or else the orb for Enrage phase might spawn northeast instead of northwest. So keep that in mind when you're planning where to place the boulders. Remember, he's going to drop boulders on the opposite side of where you shadow barrage, so basically try not to stun from the southeast side if you have boulders coming up. Dealing with lightning is simple: stand on any of the corner tiles and run to the other side when the lightning looks like this. Bow after reaching each side, and once the tornado spawns, run diagonally onto these tiles from the Kirby tiles, and then run back to the corner on the other side. Repeat the process until lightning's over, and that's it. If you get hit by either special, it doesn't really matter. That's why I packed the starting setup with a bunch of brews. Realistically, this is not a boss that needs a lot of food, so you shouldn't worry if you take some random damage here and there. A tornado is going to spawn at 50% HP and it'll follow you around. If it hits you, then it'll do like 50 damage and respawn in the same position that it hit you after about 4 ticks. So just be aware of that and always keep moving. So the core strategy for the early phases of the fight is to prevent it from speeding up and spawning any random boulders. Random boulders can get in the way of Enrage phase, so we'll be avoiding that by shadow barraging the Leviathan no more than 2 T-bows after any special or at the start of the fight. If you want, you can also choose to just shadow barrage it instantly after specials. This makes it so you don't have to count, but it does mean you'll have to deal with more specials throughout the fight. Enrage phase is the real problem with Leviathan. Once Leviathan falls under 550 HP, it'll go into Enrage phase and then spawn the orb in the northwest corner. The only time it might not spawn the orb in the northwest corner is if it has too many boulders, in which case it'll rotate clockwise. This is why you'll sometimes see the orb spawn in the northeast corner for certain runs. As such, try to get Leviathan as close to 550 HP as possible. Usually 570 or 580 is a good range, but if it's under 600, I wouldn't worry about it. Angler up to 121 HP, and then shadow barrage it from the northeast side, assuming your northwest corner is free. This means you'll get a max T-bow from the southwest side, and the tornado's gonna follow you south. Try to do the stun shot a little farther out than the middle, because the rocks are gonna immediately drop on where you did the shot, and you don't want those boulders getting in the way when you have to circle around during the Enrage. From there, immediately run north into the orb and then dump both of your Webweaver specs onto the boss, and then put your P-neck and T-bow on and shoot. Try to stay ahead of the orb to give yourself a little bit of extra leeway. It has a 5 tile protection radius, so you don't ever have to worry about getting too far ahead. Staying ahead of the orb is also going to give you a little bit more time before the tornado catches up to you, but even if it does, it's not a big deal. That's because the main thing I found that helped me during Enrage phase was completely ignoring my food the second Enrage phase started. Trying to focus on eating, pathing, and flicking, and you're looking at the tornado, it's all too much. Missing a prayer on Leviathan can hit up to like 60. And if you're so worried about how you're sitting low HP that now you're looking at your food, but you're switching to your prayers, you look at the pathing, tornado, this, that, incoming attacks, I can't stand in melee distance. You just can't keep track of all of that for very long. So yeah, maybe you get an eat off, but now you're more likely to take the next 3 hits. So you end up healing 40 HP, but you lose 60 in the process, and then that makes you even more shook, you start to panic, and then you die. So what I'm telling you is that you have to simplify. The thing that pushed me over the edge and got me to start getting KC was anglering to 121 and then completely ignoring my food during Enrage. I could be 3 HP and I would not even think about touching my food because I'm using my entire focus on nothing but prayers and pathing. Nothing else is worth your attention. And I know some of you are going to ask, what about the tornado? Won't you just die to it? Fuck the tornado. I don't care. If you put 100% of your effort into hitting every prayer flick and you miss nothing, that tornado has to hit you 3 times before you die. So first, it has to catch up to you because you lured it south and then you dumped both your specs north and then, you followed the orb. It's gonna take some time before the tornado first catches you. Then it's gonna take some more time to respawn. And then it has to catch up to you again. After it hits you again, it has to respawn again. And then after that, it has to catch you again. And then only then will you actually die. By the time that's all said and done, it's been like 25 seconds. If you dumped both Webweaver specs and you weren't eating every other hit, you'd have already killed it by then. I've literally seen so many friends miss so many kills because they're so caught up eating, they didn't even kill it after 1.5 full rotations around the boss. And by then, the boulders are stacking up, it's ruining the pathing, they get meleeed and they blame it on the boulders. It's like it's not the boulders, you just have to kill it quicker. So if this tornado's catching up to you, who cares? I could literally be 2 HP and the only thing I will be focusing on are prayers and pathing. The only excusable time for the average player to try and eat is if you get like 7 mage hits in a row. And even then, personally, I'm still just gonna focus on my prayers. So in conclusion, if the tornado catches you and you take like 50 damage, it's whatever. You can dodge a little if you want, but the second you take your eyes off the prayer and you stop focusing on your pathing, that's when you're gonna die. Don't care about the NATO, don't care about your food. The only things you should focus on are not getting meleeed and not missing prayers. So that leads us to a couple common problems. A lot of people take damage because they start praying early. I think this happens because a lot of people panic and they see like 5-6 orbs in the air and they just pray against the ones in the middle. But the thing is, it's the ones that are closest to you that are often hardest to see, and those are the ones that you have to pray against immediately. Personally, I've heard of a few ways to get around this. A lot of people use the in-game sounds because it happens every tick. It's basically like your in-game metronome telling you when to click your next prayer. If you want a more visual cue, I look to change my prayer when the closest orb touches me. This works well because I'm already so focused on the pathing, I'm staring at it anyway. But the main thing is to stay calm and not panic. Alternatively, you can take a blowpipe and blowpipe walk the boss. If you do this ahead of the tornado, you'll stay ahead of the tornado, because you average 2 tiles of movement every 2 ticks. So until you reach a corner, you won't really get out of sync with the orb or the NATO, and people tend to like this for the timing. But personally, I'd suggest it only after trying the T-bow, because I do think that the T-bow does come out to be better DPS. This is just an alternative if you want to try reaching for some different approaches. Lastly, if you're really struggling and you don't think you can handle the prayer flicking with the movement, you can actually try the Justiciar method, but it comes with a catch. This method does not work if you are only camping mage pray. Even in this setup, if you just camp mage, you're dead 99% of the time. What the Justiciar is for is if it starts jatting or alternating very quickly. If it's doing 3-4 range hits in a row, don't be lazy, change your prayers. Because you're not going to reliably live if you don't at least get the easy ones out the way. But with the Justiciar, if you feel like it's alternating too much, too fast for you and you start to lose track, that's when you just stick on the Pray Mage and then be ready to put some Phoenix on. But the key is you have to be ready to flick if it's going to streak 4, 5, 6 range hits in a row. Otherwise, this setup will not work. For those curious, yes, I have seen one of my friends secure a kill using this method, and I think it took him 80 orbs in total, but I think less than half of them were using this strategy. So keep in mind, this last strategy is an experimental one. I can't guarantee it'll be perfect for everyone, but if you're really struggling with the prayers, even if you're not eating and even if you're fully focused, then this is a setup you can use as a last resort. And with that out the way, I think the main takeaways for this boss are all centered around Enrage phase. Even if you take a bunch of damage for the first half, doesn't really matter. As long as you can get into Enrage phase with 120 HP, that is more than enough to get you the kill. In my opinion, the main takeaways are focus entirely on prayers and pathing. Don't worry about your food, don't worry about your HP. Focus absolutely everything on praying correctly and not getting meleeed and staying ahead of the orb. The second is keep boulders out of the middle and out of the northwest corner. You don't want boulders blocking your path when you get to Enrage, and you want the orb spawn to be predictable so you can dump your specs freely without having to catch up to the orb. So to that extent, keep boulders free from the middle and don't put them in the northwest corner if you can. And lastly, make sure you're not panicking and changing your prayers early. Stay calm, use your game sounds, it's your in-game metronome. If all else fails, feel free to try the experimental setup. But with that out the way, I hope this guide helps you get this down, because if you can beat Leviathan, you've basically got Blood Torva pretty much in your hands. So Good luck, boys. If you want to check out my other guides, I've got guides for all the other bosses in the description, and I hope these guides helped you out.